and then the boy drowned. His name was Kirui, a wild 12-year-old with a mop of untamable curls and a grin that always seemed on the verge of laughter or trouble. He had a boundless energy that carried him through the village fields, over sun-baked dirt roads, and ultimately to the riverbanks of the Kaidi River. The river was as much a part of life in Marabani as the rising sun or the endless expanse of the savannah. It provided water, food, and a place for children like Kirui to prove their boldness in the swirling currents. But the river took him. The story spread quickly. That warm afternoon, Kirui had gone swimming with his friends, like he always did. The air had been thick with the sleepy hum of cicadas and the collective sigh of a village basking in the usual rhythm of late summer. His friends said they'd barely noticed he was missing. One moment, Kirui was laughing, splashing water in great arcs toward the sky, and the next moment, he was gone. The water moved fast that day, they noted nervously to the elders who had gathered them for questioning. It was as if the river itself had snatched him. It took the villagers 2 agonizing days to find Kirui. His small, lifeless body was discovered tangled in reeds several miles downstream. When they carried him back, a silence fell over Marabani, a silence punctuated only by the occasional cry of a mourning mother or the wails of Kirui's siblings, clutching each other as though the river might come for them next. Tragedy was no stranger to Marabani. Lives were hard-earned and easily lost in the unforgiving rhythm of the savannah. Yet, Kirui's death was different. It was the way the river had pulled him into its depths so suddenly, so forcefully, that unnerved everyone. It was unnatural, some muttered. Kirui was a strong swimmer. Others whispered that the river was angry. Perhaps it had been slighted. Perhaps something had been overlooked, some forgotten offering or trespassed boundary. Fear ate away at the fabric of everyday life. Crops were left unweeded, markets closed earlier than usual, and the laughter of children playing in the fields disappeared altogether. Eyes turned instinctively toward the Kaidi, which wound lazily past the western edge of the village, its broad surface shimmering with indifference. That was when the whispers began. "The ancestors are angry," the elders declared solemnly, and no one dared to challenge them. The night after Kirui's burial, drums echoed across the savannah as Marabani prepared to cleanse the river. Fires blazed in the village square while women chanted in low, steady rhythms, calling on their ancestors to intercede. The men carried bowls of river water mixed with herbs and ash, murmuring prayers with every step. Families huddled close, clutching their children, as if the Kaidi's ghostly hand might reach out once more. And Wakio watched. She stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, her presence so quiet it was almost unnoticeable. Wakio lived alone on the outskirts of Marabani, where green grass folded into the dry gold of the distant plains. Her hut stood apart from the others, unadorned, its thatched roof weathered with time. Some called her a widow, though no one could remember her husband's name or if such a man had ever existed. Others whispered different, darker things. She was a witch, a healer, a hermit who talked to the wind and brewed teas to quiet the unrest of wandering spirits. Wakio spoke rarely, and when she did, people listened. They didn't always like what they heard. The morning after the cleansing ritual, she appeared suddenly in the village square. Her face carried the deep grooves of wisdom and weariness, though her steps were swift and purposeful, her back unbowed. As the villagers bustled, trading maize and gossip, she climbed the raised platform where elder meetings were typically held. "I need to speak," Wakio said, her voice carrying across the square. Heads turned, conversations faltered, the crowd stilled, and a tense silence settled like dust in the air. Wakio hardly ever ventured into the square, and she certainly didn't command everyone's attention like this. Slowly, the villagers began to gather, their eyes flickering between curiosity and unease. "Kirui's death," Wakio said, gripping the wooden podium as if it gave her strength, "was not an accident." The words rippled through the crowd like a strong wind bending tall grass. Faces turned to one another, brows furrowed in confusion and disbelief. The whispers rose again, this time sharper. What did she mean? How could she know? A voice rang out, Old Man Kama, his gnarled hands gripping his walking stick as he leaned forward.
"Wakio, you dare defy the elders? The river has spoken. It demanded a cleansing."
The river, Wakio interrupted before he could finish, her voice resolute. Demanded nothing. The river is not angry. It does only what it has always done. It flows, it moves, it carries, it takes. That is its nature. Her eyes swept across the crowd, locking onto individuals with an intensity that made some look away. No, this is something else, she pressed, her tone unwavering despite the nervous shifting of the onlookers. The ancestors are not angry with us, but someone among us has lied. Gasps rippled through the crowd, louder this time. People exchanged wary glances, their minds racing to make sense of her words. Who could she mean? What could she mean?
You cannot throw accusations so carelessly, another elder barked, his voice trembling with both age and indignation. Who among us would have reason to harm a child?
Wakio said nothing at first. Slowly, she released the wooden edge she had been gripping and began pacing the platform, her bare feet silent against the smooth planks. Her words came carefully, deliberately. Kirui was a wild boy, yes, a wanderer by heart, but he noticed things, even when the rest of us overlooked them. He wandered not out of carelessness but curiosity. Her gaze landed on a woman in the crowd, a plump merchant whose face had gone unusually pale. I heard the boy mention seeing something strange before the rains came last week, Wakio continued, her eyes narrowing. Perhaps something meant to remain hidden. The merchant, a woman named Becky, dropped her basket of millet, its contents scattering across the dirt like tiny golden beads. Her hands trembled as she bent to retrieve it, but not before the villagers around her stepped back, their brows furrowed with suspicion. No, Mbecky's voice cracked. You're twisting this. You have no proof of anything. Wakio's voice remained calm, but it carried an edge sharper than broken glass. Perhaps not, but the truth has a way of resurfacing like a body caught in the current. Mbeki froze, her trembling hands clutching her basket like a lifeline. Beads of sweat formed on her brow as the weight of Wakio's gaze bore down on her. The silence grew oppressive, heavy with unspoken words and the unrelenting stare of dozens of eyes. Mbeki stammered, her voice faltering. It was an accident. He wasn't supposed to... The crowd erupted into chaos. Wasn't supposed to what? Someone shouted. Did you harm the boy? Shrieked another. Mbeki sank to her knees, her basket forgotten at her side. Her sobs broke through the noise, piercing and raw. Through her tears, the fragmented truth emerged. Kirui had seen something he shouldn't have. Beneath the cover of tangled reeds, Mbeki had hidden stolen sacks of grain meant for the elders during a season of scarcity. She had threatened Kirui to keep quiet, but when he threatened to tell anyway, she'd panicked. She hadn't meant to push him into the water. The river had done the rest. The villagers stood stunned as the confession spilled out between her wails. Wakio remained silent, her expression unreadable as she stepped down from the platform. She walked past the crowd, past the still sniveling Mbeki, and toward the edge of the square. Before she disappeared back toward her solitary hut, she turned and addressed the elders one last time. The river is not cursed, she said, her voice even, but sometimes it reveals what we choose to keep hidden. And with that, she was gone.